All right, so diving into something pretty fundamental today. For anyone working in construction safety, we all got to be on the same page about who's responsible for what when it comes to, well, keeping things safe on site.
Couldn't agree more.
Hmm.
You get your prime contractors, you got your subs, all these different teams coming together. And knowing who's carrying the safety ball, well, it's not just about avoiding confusion. It's about making sure everyone heads home safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, we see it all the time, right? Different companies, different workers. It can get messy fast if those lines of responsibility get blurred.
Exactly. And for today's deep dive, we're going straight to the source. We've got OSHA regulation 1926.16, which lays it all out. And then we've got this really interesting letter from OSHA back in 2005. Really clarifies how those rules get put into practice.
So yeah, our mission here, I guess, is to really give everyone listening, give you a clear, practical understanding of how OSHA approaches safety, especially on these, more complex work sites.
Work sites with multiple employers, yeah, absolutely.
Multiple employers, lots of moving parts.
Right.
All right, so 1926.16. Let's get into it. So the first part, 1926.16a, it talks about agreements between contractors, and it says, primes and subs, they can actually agree on who's going to provide those site-wide things like first aid or even something as basic as toilets.
It's true. For efficiency's sake, prime contractor might say, hey, let's just have one centralized, set of, amenities for the whole site.
Right. Makes sense. Keep it all in one place. Easier to manage, maybe.
It can be, yeah. But the real kicker here, the point that everyone really needs to remember is that while those agreements, they can determine who provides the service, physically sets it all up.
Right.
The legal responsibility, making sure it all meets OSHA standards.
Yeah.
That always comes back to the prime contractor.
Always circles back.
Always. They can delegate the task, sure, but they can't delegate that ultimate accountability.
They hold the bag, right?
Yeah.
So even if a sub, say, they agree, okay, we'll handle the first aid stations.
Mm-hmm.
If those stations aren't up to code, OSHA can still come knocking on the prime contractor's door.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. The prime contractor, they're holding the master key to safety on the whole site. They can hand out copies, for specific areas, tasks, whatever. But the security of the whole structure, that's on them.
That's a good analogy. It really underscores, I think, why due diligence from the get-go is so crucial,
It really is.
Okay, so moving on then, 1926.16b. This feels like, a really important part of the whole thing. It says, basically, when a prime contractor signs on for the whole project, they're taking on all the employer obligations under OSHA.
All of them.
Even if they end up, subcontracting a big chunk of the actual work.
Exactly. And if we zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, this really solidifies that prime contractor as the central point of responsibility.
Central point, yeah.
For safety, for everything. They can't just, sign some papers, bring on some subs, and wash their hands of it.
Not so easy.
No. That initial agreement to take on the whole project, it inherently comes with that overarching responsibility for safety. It's a package deal.
Package deal. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but, it's not all on the prime, right? Because then you got 1926.16c, and now this one's talking about the subs role, saying that, when they agree to perform a specific piece of the work, they're taking on responsibility too.
They are.
For OSHA compliance, obviously, but specifically related to, their piece of the pie.
Their scope of work, yeah. This is really where that idea of shared responsibility comes into play. It's about making sure things are clear. The sub, they have a direct responsibility, undeniable responsibility for the safety of their own people.
Their own crew.
Exactly. And for the tasks that they've been hired to do. And that's important, right? It prevents this ambiguity. It ensures that everyone involved, everyone has skin in the game.
Right. So they're not just, showing up and saying, well, safety's the crime's problem.
Exactly. They have their own piece of it.
Yeah.
And it's a big piece.
And this leads us right into, 1926.16d, right? And this one's talking about, okay, we got this shared responsibility, but what does that actually mean? And it says, straight up, if there are violations and it's an area where both the prime and a sub have responsibility, OSHA's coming after both of them.
Both of them. And this really raises an important question for those of you out there, working in safety.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is an area of shared responsibility?
Yeah, what does that even look like?
Right. And generally speaking, it's those spaces, those conditions
Uh,
where the work of multiple employers, it kind of overlaps.
right.
Or where hazards created by one, they might impact the other. Think about something like scaffolding.
Okay, scaffolding.
So the company that put it up, probably a sub,
All
right?
right, right.
But then you have all these other trades using it. Could be another sub, could be the prime zone crew.
Right, right. Everybody's up there.
Everybody's up there. So they all have a vested interest in making sure it's safe.
And a legal responsibility.
Or legal responsibility. That's shared responsibility in action.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got the groundwork laid, 1926.16. We know the prime has overall responsibility. We know there's this shared responsibility piece. Now let's bring in this 2005 letter.
Yeah, let's do it.
So what was going on back then? What was the situation that caused OSHA to put this letter out? What were they trying to clear up?
Well, this letter was actually a response to some concerns about prime contractors, specifically those working on projects that fell under this other law, the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act.
Okay, CWHSS.
CWHSSA, yeah.
Yeah.
And the heart of the issue was really about, which set of rules took precedence. You've got OSHA's multi-employer citation policy,
Right.
which they use under the OSH Act.
Right.
And then you've got this general statement, about prime contractors having overall responsibility in 1926.16A.
Okay.
So the question was, when it came to enforcement, which one really mattered?
Gotcha. Okay, now for our listeners who, maybe aren't as familiar with CWHSSA, can you give us a quick rundown? What is this thing?
Sure. So CWHSSA, it's a law that actually came before the OSH Act.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it basically sets safety and health standards specifically for construction work, but only for work done under certain federal contracts.
Okay, so federal projects.
Federal projects, exactly. And what's interesting, and OSHA actually points this out in the letter, is that the safety standards themselves, they're pretty much the same in both CWHSSA and the OSH Act.
Really? So the rules are the same, whether it's a federal project under CWHSSA or any other project. The rules are basically the same.
Yeah, identical, basically.
Okay. So where is the confusion then? If the rules are the same, what was the issue?
Well, the difference comes down to how those rules are actually enforced. You see, the OSH Act, it gives OSHA the power to issue citations, to say, hey, fix this violation.
Right.
And to actually impose fines, financial penalties.
Hit them in the pocketbook.
Exactly. And that's been really effective in getting people to comply.
Yeah.
CWHSA, on the other hand, well, it's got a different enforcement structure.
Less teeth.
Less teeth, you could say.
Gosh.
So OSHA made it very clear in this letter, their primary way of enforcing safety on construction sites doesn't matter if it's also under CWHSSA or not, it's through the OSH Act.
Okay. So even if a project, is getting federal money and technically falls under CWHSSA, OSHA is still going to be looking at it through the OSH Act lens?
Yeah. They're going to use those OSH Act powers,
Yeah.
to make sure things are safe. And
Right.
and if they need to issue citations, that's what they're going to do.
All right, that makes things a bit clearer. So they're using the OSH Act and they're using that multi-employer citation policy, not just CWHSSA, not just 1926.16A, to figure out who's responsible, who's liable, all that.
Right. It's about using the tools they had to get the job done, to keep workers safe.
Right.
And the OSH Act, it just gives them more options, more ways to make sure things get fixed.
So when an OSHA inspector walks onto a site, they're looking around, they're thinking, okay, OSH Act, multi-employer citation policy, that's my framework. Even if the specific rule they're looking at, it's the same in both laws.
Yeah. And that's a really, really important point. The rules themselves might have roots in both places, CWHSA, OSH Act.
Okay.
But when it comes to actually enforcing them, in those situations where you've got multiple employers, it's the OSH Act that really matters. It's the foundation of how OSHA operates.
The foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does 1926.16A fit into all this? The part about the prime contractor's overall responsibility.
Well, that's still a key principle. It's the starting point.
Okay.
OSHA, they're not throwing that out the window. But what this letter does is it emphasizes that the OSH Act, and specifically that multi-employer citation policy, those are the tools, the real-world mechanisms that OSHA uses to put that responsibility into practice.
Okay, so 1926.16A, it's like the the concept.
It's the concept.
The big idea.
The big idea.
And then the OSH Act and the multi-employer citation policy, those are the tools that make it happen.
Exactly. It's about understanding both sides of the coin.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So I think we've covered a lot here. Let's try to sum it up for our listeners, make sure everyone's got the key points.
All right. Good idea.
So prime contractors, bottom line, they hold the ultimate responsibility for safety on the site. Doesn't matter how much work is subcontracted out. It's their site. It's their responsibility. So subcontractors, they're responsible for safety, but within their scope of work.
Right. And that creates that system of shared responsibility, especially in those areas where their work overlaps or where hazards might affect multiple crews.
Right. Common areas, shared equipment, all that.
Yeah.
And then the really crucial point here, I think, is that even though those safety standards, the rules themselves, they might be found in both CWHSSA and the OSH Act.
Mm-hmm.
OSHA's main tool, their go-to for enforcement, is the OSH Act, including that multi-employer citation policy.
Exactly. They're going to use those tools to make sure everyone's doing their part to keep the site safe.
Make sure everyone's doing their part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the safety professionals out there? Those of you who are really committed to upping your safety game.
Well, first and foremost, it means really understanding these principles. It's not enough to just to memorize the regulations. It's about understanding how OSHA is going to be looking at your site.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just about the what, it's about the how.
Exactly. How they're going to determine who's accountable, who's liable if something goes wrong. And that leads to, a really important question that I think everyone should be asking themselves. How can you take these principles and actually put them into practice every day?
Yeah, how do you make them real?
How do you make them real? How do prime contractors and subcontractors, how do they work together to build that safety culture?
Right.
A culture where everyone's on the same page, everyone's looking out for each other.
That's the dream, right?
It is. And it starts with communication. It starts with clear agreements, with a shared commitment to safety. Don't wait for something bad to happen. Don't wait for OSHA to show up.
Right. Be proactive.
Be proactive. Define those lines of responsibility up front. Work together to make sure everyone's in compliance. That's how you create a truly safe work environment.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Really, really important stuff.
It is.
Well, I think that about covers it for today's deep dive. A huge thank you to Safety One Source for making this all possible.
Yeah, thanks to them.
And of course, a big thank you to all of you listening, the safety individuals, the folks out there who are always looking to learn more, to do better.
Keep up the great work, everyone.
We'll catch you on the next one.